Welcome to this episode of the HRD Talks podcast, where we talk with HR directors and people directors about their journey into HR, get their insight into current trends in the world of work, and take their advice on the future of HR and how HR professionals can deliver value and progress their career. I'm Nick Elliott, employment lawyer, and I am so excited to have Jane Rawden, People Director of Teal Transformations, with us today. Welcome, Jane.
Good morning.
Excellent. Jane has a wealth of experience with a master's in strategic HR management. She's worked at Babcock. She's worked in professional services as a consultant at Awbery Management, and more recently, through COVID, in the hospitality sector at Bistro Pierre, and is now joining us today as People Director at Teal Transformations. So Jane, would you mind just talking us through how you got into HR in the first place, and perhaps some career highlights as you've gone from there?
Yeah, no, be delighted to.
Thank you.
Nick. I guess if you say, how did I get into HR? I'll be super honest. I kind of hadn't got a clue when I left school what I wanted to do. So I signed up to what was then Clarendon College for business studies. And it was business and finance and personnel. And I had to Google what does commerce mean and what does personnel mean? And that was back in the day when there is no Google. So it was, getting the encyclopedia and the dictionary out and going, okay, it's something about numbers and people and business. And I guess down to the great lecturers, I found that I really loved what was then personnel. I understood it and I enjoyed it. And it just seemed to come naturally when we were doing the topic. And so I got myself into a HR assistant role, what was then Panelka, Force of the Chartered Accountants. And kind of the rest was history, really. Got my CIPD, went on to do my master's in strategic HRM and was a fellow before I was 40. I am so passionate about my profession and what we stand for and what we do. And I guess when I look back over my career, I guess the things that I love when you work in HR is that change is constant. There is always a challenge, and actually our role is really about transformation. And I think we're in a very fortunate position where we're key to aligning the organisation and the culture and the people and getting that collaborative working together. Yeah. I'm not saying that's easy, but it is a great opportunity and a great privilege to work in that position. So that for me is, my space and what I enjoy. And I guess for many people, you start off a career not knowing what you want to do, but you find yourself into it. And I live and breathe it every day now. I guess some of those stories around, what makes it challenging and getting that cultural alignment, you see it all the time. Next time you go to an organisation, Nick, when you park in the car park, just observe the parking arrangements. Thankfully, we don't see many days now where the directors have their sign outside the front door, but they still exist. When you walk into reception, what does a reception say about the organisation and the culture? And does that line up with their purpose and their vision? And we all know that infamous sign on the toilet door or the infamous sign in the kitchen, and it makes you question when that organisation is saying to you, work collaboratively or own things. Clearly, if you've got to put those signs up, you haven't. So I think, we see a lot of mismatch. You go into an organisation, the directors talk about openness and working together, and yet they're still behind those glass doors when you're in. And you get that token pool table or the fruit bowl or the free soup at lunch. But then you find that they're proud to say there's an annual appraisal. Like, who talks to each other once a year now? So that space for people and for HR is a really great opportunity. And I think when I look back over my career, I've been so lucky, as you've just said, to have such a diverse sector.
Yeah, it's really diverse.
Yeah, so professional services, working in a large international PLC, corporate world, and then a space with my really good friend Mary Sisson and in the L&D space, and getting to work at board level, down to team leader level, delivering training and development. And then most recently, Bistro through COVID, a real challenge through COVID. And I think, many organisations these days are facing unprecedented times, but hospitality, as you know, with the desperate calls I was making to you during COVID, we had a tough time. We really did. Yeah. And I've been running Teal now for just over 6 years as a business, and absolutely love it and love working with that different sector.
And that sort of diversity of experience that you had, did you start out thinking, I want to go into a particular sector, or I want to keep it diverse? Was there a plan at that stage?
No. Anyone who has a plan, I salute them. I really do. I definitely didn't have a plan. I think I get itchy feet. And I think I enjoy a challenge. And if it's complex, I love it. And I think what I found was each time I was looking something for different and complex. And I guess looking back over my career now, I was also looking to align my values. And that's what we're seeing in this space now. More than ever, people are joining organisations for that purpose. And I think probably when you look subconsciously, that's what we all connect to. But that would be my top tip for any professional is get that diverse sector, because it really helps you see things differently and have empathy and understanding with different organisations.
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice. That makes sense to me. And obviously working with Teal now, you have a diversity, I guess, in terms of clients and the different places that you get to visit and work with. Just the name Teal, where does that come from?
Yeah. So Teal actually comes about by an author called Frederick Lelux, who put together a cultural model, and he looks at 5 levels of organisational development and organisational maturity. And those 5 colours, I won't go into them too much, but there's a red, there's an amber, there's an orange, there's a green, and there's a teal. And teal stands for really reflecting that the organisation has a deep sense of purpose, that people are self-managed, and that they don't operate within a bureaucratic structure, but, you know, the hierarchy isn't a priority. And when I was thinking about what do I call my consultancy organisation all those years ago, I felt that Teal reflected trust, it reflected robust collaboration, it reflected about people bringing them whole selves to work. And I guess that's my values, and I guess that's what I'm trying to do as a brand of HR. And so for me, Teal just described it perfectly, but steeped in a little bit of a model as well. So yes, a bit random when you look at Jane Rawden and how does Teal sit together, but there's some method in my madness. And I'd recommend, you know, any organisation or any HR professional just having a look at that cultural alignment piece and seeing where their organisation sits against Teal, and just have a little look and see if it can help them progress in the crazy world that we're operating in.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And obviously, as part of that range of clients that you now get to work with, you've obviously spent time working in-house, in inverted commas, as an HR director. What's the difference between those two roles? What do you enjoy about each of them, I guess?
So if we think about working in-house, first of all, you're right at the heart of it. You're absolutely at the heart of it. Front line and centre in the firing line sometimes. But every day is pretty intense. But you have the chance to really bring that alignment together. The challenge is not getting too much in the weeds. The challenge is you can be at your laptop, at your computer, and not move all day, because the intensity is relentless, 100%. I think what I love about being on the outside coming in to support is the people that I work with. They are amazing HRDs, they're amazing organisations, but just sometimes it's that fresh pair of eyes. It's that chance to ask those questions that, because I'm on the outside looking in, you notice them. And I think that's a blend. I think any organisation values that fresh pair of eyes and that fresh challenge, but internally your job is very much to stay ahead of the game and make sure you're up to speed with where it's going and what you're trying to achieve, and that can be a challenge.
That makes sense. And what sort of things are you working on at the minute? What kind of variety of clients are you working with? Kind of what's going on out there, I guess, right now? I
think it's pretty mad, right? I'm sure you're getting the phone calls.
You've seen a bit of that, yeah.
So I think there is this ever-changing world at the moment, and, you know, we've come out of COVID, and I genuinely don't know of any HR practitioner who wasn't, in the first instance, shattered from COVID anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think for me, we've talked about it before, your HR network. For me, you know, HR and finance are the unsung heroes of the COVID world. Yep. And challenge, definitely the word forward. And I think, you know, we're seeing so much complexity out there. If you think about the employer agenda and the organisational direction, the uncertainty and complexity. If you think about what employees want as they come out of a COVID world, they've had a reset of expectations, and we're trying to align everything together. So whether it's the hybrid working, it's thinking about salary expectations, or moving towards a 4-day week, they're all massive topics that we're trying to unpick. And health and wellbeing, that's like we've never seen it before. You know, health and wellbeing at a level where some people genuinely this winter will not be able to have a regular shower, will not be able to have a cup of tea before they come to work. It's that basic need level that we are now operating when we talk about health and wellbeing. And thinking as a HR practitioner, how do we bring that together I don't think there is a rule book that we can lean on now. I think we've got to be creative. We've got to kind of keep exploring it in our head and be curious and really think about, where is the organisation going? What do our people want? And how do we make it work together? There's a really great example I can give recently of an organisation that is currently doing a very expensive job evaluation. Okay. They believe that their employees are wanting transparency in their pay, agree with, but they want more money. And they're frightened that they're going to leave this organisation because their salary levels are not high enough. Now, this job evaluation is costing big bucks and will not be done until March, April next year. But actually, when you drill it down, when you spend some time with some of the employees, they're worried about fuel poverty. They're worried about the here and now of their bills this side of Christmas and next side of Christmas. And so actually doing what some organisations have done and given a one-off payment just before Christmas and just after Christmas to support people probably is more about the right thing to do. Yes, give you a call. Yes, make sure the documentation is right. But actually look at how you land those bonuses, those one-off payments to support people. So I think it is a challenging world, and we're getting a little bit too quick to jump on ideas rather than stopping and breathing and thinking about, how do we make all this work for our employees? Really listening to what they're trying to say, but also thinking about what the organisation works. Now, this organisation is going to spend a whole load on job evaluation, probably will have spent less by looking at that sort of model of fuel poverty allowance. So I think we're seeing a lot of change, and as practitioners, we've just got to stop and breathe. We've got to make sure we take that helicopter view and look at it both from the employee side and the employer side, and look at your metrics as well. What are your stats saying? So I had a lovely story where I got asked to go and join an organisation. Staff turnover was massive. They were losing people, and they gave me the headline numbers, massive numbers, and they wanted me to come in and do some training of their managers, overhaul their recruitment process, and make it so that people stay. And actually, when you looked at their recruitment process and when you talked to the employees who had recently joined, it was really strong. In fact, it was probably best in class. What you actually saw was employees are connecting to their brand, to their experience, to the journey of what this organisation's about. They land in at work, and the onboarding piece and the kind of 30, 60, 90-day experience is just awful. Add in hybrid working, they meet their manager at interview and then don't have another face-to-face until 3-4 months down the line. And so there's a mismatch. Yep. So when you talk about the challenges, I think one of the key things is making sure you get to the root cause of what you're trying to focus on. That organisation where we're going to do a whole load of training on interview skills for line managers, where actually we need to give people space and time to do a great onboarding and a great engagement piece afterward. Yeah. Looking at those numbers and looking at those matrix, I think is the challenge for all of us in HR at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's really, really interesting, and taking that time to just breathe and work out what the issue actually is when the world's moving so quickly at the minute.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then I guess taking you back in time a little bit, the challenges of COVID in the hospitality sector. So I'm guessing some of our listeners may, have experience of that. You're right, HR people had a rough time and sort of saved the world, as I like to think of it. But actually, particularly in hospitality, that was a tough time, right?
Yeah, massive. And, when I was at the law firm, I went through the recession. I thought that was bad, but nothing prepared me for COVID. I remember we shut those restaurants. We actually shut our restaurants a day before Boris shut the UK down. And I remember we made that call, and I was talking to the general managers going, team, I don't know the answer. I know it's not safe to stay open, and I'm going to talk to you on Monday. But right now, I don't know the next step. Now, who in HR says that? Like, really, do you talk about transparency and authenticity? I mean, that was a good piece that came out of COVID. I think the ability to really be honest, because we didn't know the answers was a plus. The pressure was massively intense. I think the thing that saved our world during COVID was technology. And again, if you link it back to what HR people need to be focused on, we had a social media platform, 26 restaurants up and down the UK. And being able to talk to our employees through social media and through Teams and Zoom as well, but be able to keep that connectivity and that collaboration was key. And I know, Nick, you can tell some stories about the heroes and villains of COVID. And, you know, some people shut their restaurants down and people didn't hear from them until they reopened. Yep. And we were able to keep that connectivity, that direction of travel, that conversation through with all our employees throughout. And I think COVID took us into a different space. You know, many organisations did quizzes with alcohol online. Like, would you have ever written a policy, Nick, with us drinking online? Pre-COVID, probably not. Yeah. We did some fabulous stuff. We had people exercising the equivalent of walking all around our restaurants. We did a bake-off, and we took our customers to come to that bake-off and to vote for the best dish. So it was tough. But because we'd got the technology right, I think we kept our employees, and we really did. You know, we didn't have a mass exit. We kept the collaboration, and we kept people together. But I took calls that I wasn't qualified to take of individuals saying, you know, they're stuck in a room and they can't get out. And that first Christmas, particularly for that landscape where people hadn't made it back abroad and they'd got no family here, it was hard. And I think, you know, it was a tough time. But I think for me, my takeaway was where do we go now with technology? I was quite proud that I was in the right space, but effectively we were then Facebook at work. Well, we've gone from, you know, Facebook is old news, right? And then we went on to Instagram. Facebook told the story, Instagram told the pictures. I haven't quite got my space to TikTok yet, videos, but like that's where technology is going. Yeah. And as an employer and as a HRD, we've got to kind of keep at the front end of that technology space. And when people say, well, have an appraisal, want to see how we use a notice board, like it's so not the right place. So absolutely. I think COVID, you know, those of us that were at the front foot, we were absolutely exhausted. I remember some of those calls to you saying, Nick, you know, what are we going to do? And you're like, well...
Nobody really knows.
Yeah. And, but we did it and we came out of it and, you know, we're in a good place. So. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's interesting that you highlighted that communication piece, because that was something that I'd spotted with you guys during that time, where actually communicating with people constantly was really, really important, keeping them engaged. And as you say, just being open and honest. It felt like that there was no real other option than that. And I'm sure that was a real positive for you guys during that time. In terms of positives, trying to move it on from COVID a little, it's bringing back flashbacks for lots of people, I'm sure. The positives have come out of COVID, I suppose. The world of work has changed, I think, more rapidly. You know, it's pretty much established now, isn't it? It's changed more rapidly than ever before. Yeah. What kind of opportunities do you see coming out of that? I
mean, I think recruitment and attraction, yes, it's hard, but no longer do you have to have that kind of radius around, we can, you know, only be 10 miles out of Nottingham because that's where we're based. You know, we've got people working all over the world now because we've broadened our thinking, we've broadened our curiosity. So I think the positive is it's forced us to embrace diversity, it's forced us to embrace inclusion, and that brings creativity, it brings business results, and it brings a whole heap of other benefits. So yeah, I think, you know, as organisations come out of COVID, we've got to understand the different ways of working, we've got to do that, but actually it's opened up those opportunities for breadth and depth of diversity as well, which is just fantastic.
No, that makes sense. So Jane, what other trends are you seeing out there at the minute amongst your clients?
I think in terms of trends, it's really trying to understand ways of working, how to work, salary expectations, that 4-day a week. And what I would say is one size doesn't fit all. So I would massively encourage you to think about your data and what does your data say? What's your HR dashboard? What are your KPIs? Probably the biggest trend, and I don't mean it in a trendy way, but in an added value way, is really starting to think about diversity and inclusion and really that sense of belonging. And what does your data tell you about that sense of belonging? Because we've opened the world up, we can work in such different ways and such diverse ways. It's fabulous for organisations, but A real example is only last week I was asked to do some work on employee engagement, and they looked at me, gone out, and I said, well, just give me some of your data on diversity. Like, well, why do you need the diversity data? We want happy workforce, right? And it's like, yeah, but we need to understand the mix and how what's your typical profile here before we even start looking at engagement. And so I think, LinkedIn's an amazing thing, but just make sure you really do adapt rather than adopt what you're doing, because one size really doesn't fit all. And make sure you're absolutely aligned to your workforce, because the reset post-COVID is people won't take it anymore. They are very much about purpose, very much about alignment. And if you haven't got that space right in your organisation, you will lose people 100%.
And that goes back to your earlier point, I guess, where you were saying taking a breath, taking a step back, and rather than spotting something on LinkedIn and thinking, oh, that looks like a great thing we should implement, actually working out whether it's the right thing for you, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, how many, if you ask yourself as a practitioner, when did you last have a day off? And I don't mean a day off to do nothing. I mean a day to think about the business. And very few HR people, and myself included, when I was in company, you have to be quite bold and brave to step away from all the chaos that is always there to give yourself time to think. And a really great thing to do is to draw a circle, like a pie chart, and just actually allocate how much time as a practitioner you're putting in on strategy, on that helicopter view on thinking. And most people will be quite tiny, quite worried that they haven't put that time in. But in the chaotic, volatile, complex world we're in, if you don't create that time to think, you're not going to be able to drive your organisation forward with that people agenda. So that would be my top tip, is to really think about how you just stop and breathe, think strategically, work out what the proposed solutions are, and then wrap it round in terms of thinking about implementation.
Great. Thank you. So, Jane, one of the other things that I admire you for is the way that you champion the HR profession. So I think I certainly see you as someone who loves learning, but also someone who loves developing other people and kind of championing the profession. For those that are kind of starting their career in HR or considering a career in HR, what would your advice be to those guys?
I think be curious, have a growth mindset, and get as much experience as you can in different sectors. But most of all, to be a great HR person, get yourself into the operational side of the business and really live the business. Because if you understand how that business is connected, you can understand the people practices and the application of HR.
No, that's great. And what about the other end of the spectrum? So, I don't know, maybe heads of or HR managers who are thinking, I'd love that HR director or people director role. What would you kind of advise those guys?
Yeah. I think as you step up through the roles of HR, the most important thing, I guess I've talked a lot about it today, but get that balance scorecard, get the numbers, because your job is to be commercial. Your job is to really understand that direction of travel for the business. And you have to be able to understand the P&L and the balance sheet. You need to be able to read it and see what the implications are on the people agenda. So give yourself time and space to think strategy, think about the numbers, and start moving towards thinking about what is the impact and the consequences from the employee side and the employer's side. So, what is the impact of what you're going to do and the consequences of what you're proposing from an employer's side, but also from the employee side, and then work out how you're going to pull it together. And that, for me, is what strategic thinking is about when you're looking at that people agenda at that HRD level. I
think that's great advice. I guess some of the best HR directors that I've worked with are commercial, and that's sometimes a bit of a vague concept, and to be more commercial. You should just be more commercial, but actually thinking about consequences from both employer and employee side is a good one. I think understanding the business and the financial side of it is another one, often a tough one. Any kind of tips for how you do that?
Your best friend is your CFO.
Okay.
It really is. It's that I will be in companies when I was in house, and I would spend time with my CFO, and I would get them to talk them through what's keeping them awake at night, where are they working, and then I would make sure that myself and my team are out in the operation. Any HR person that's sat in their office cannot be a great HR director. You need to live and breathe it. I was back in the day at Bistro. I'd go and run a shift in the kitchen. I'd be washing the pots because I wanted to understand what it was like to work as a GM and a head chef on a Saturday night at peak time when you're absolutely on your knees. So when I get that call at 11 o'clock at night because something's kicked off, do you know what? I've got some empathy and I've got some understanding.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And what about the future of HR? So there's often a lot of crystal ball gazing. There's, we want to be more commercial. We want to be at the top table. We want to have to add more value, that kind of thing. How do you see that going and how's that changing?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the role of HR is changing, and I find myself saying a lot at the moment, let's control the controllables. Like, let's just look at what we can control. But I think diversity in its true sense of inclusion and belonging is going to be massively on the agenda for us to get under the skin of. There's a lot of organisations, yes, doing some equality and diversity training, but really looking about how we can enhance that diversity to get creativity, to get performance improvement, to get, without being awful, another 10% on the bottom line through that potential of people. I think it's about having agility and being able to respond quickly to whatever is next around the corner. And let's face it, none of us really know what's coming around the corner. And so therefore having time and space for conversation and collaboration to drive high performance in this ever-changing landscape is really hard. So if you step back from that, you've got kind of the diversity piece, you've got the commercial piece, you've got the agility, and you've got collaboration. I think as practitioners, if we really keep our lens on those areas, supported with health and well-being, that will help drive that agenda forward. And I think for me, they're the foundations, to having a great engaged workforce that's high performing, that can deliver sometimes what feels like the impossible for organisations at the moment. So I think that's what I would be looking. But as a HRD, stay ahead of your sector, make sure you're up to speed with what's going off and where it's going. And technology we've talked about, but technology's I haven't got my head around how we can use TikTok on a day-to-day basis, but I know that's the way forward. We no longer are just on Insta and Facebook, we're on TikTok. So how does that translate into appraisals? How does that translate from the notice board? What does that look like? So, keep being curious would be my top tip, I guess.
And what about peers? A lot of HR people are kind of in a standalone role, or are the HRD but only have a team below them, and being vulnerable with other people is tricky sometimes. What would you kind of recommend on that?
So I used to, back in the day, we used to call it Monday night club, and I would meet with my peers on a Monday night, either for dinner or a drink, and we would just, as I call it, chew the fat. And you know what, would be really honest and go, this is tough, this is hard, what's keeping you awake at night? And that's the best thing you can do, is to keep yourself connected. Within the world of HR, you should know what's in your CEO's head. You should know what's in your CFO's head. You should be aligned to where marketing are taking the business, because that's the subtle message about purpose that employees are going to be connected to. And if you don't connect those peers in that team, you're not one team.
That makes sense to me. So I think when we're almost coming into land, one of the things that I wanted to do as part of the podcast, we don't have a sponsor for the podcast. Maybe that'll change one day, who knows? But instead, what I wanted to do was what we're calling a supplier shout out. So essentially a third party, a supplier that you've worked with, that you would recommend, that you would want to kind of advertise, champion, and why? Any ideas?
So I guess an organisation that's been so influential for me this year is an awesome training provider called Raise the Bar. Raise the Bar. Raise the Bar are an organisation who are at the forefront of high performance. They are designing programmes that actually already are looking at virtual reality and embracing virtual reality. They have programs called Change Catalysts that will shake up your thinking and your curiosity, not only as a leader, but as anybody who's wanting to be interested in the world of leadership. So yeah, my shout out would be to Raise the Bar.
Brilliant, Raise the Bar, check them out. Okay, Jane, thank you. I think we're coming into land pretty much, but any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Yeah, in terms of final thoughts, well, I guess it is super, super, super tough out there, and I know you must be getting so many interesting calls yourself, Nick, at the moment. And I think the last HR network that I attended, we were all like, my goodness, where are we going and what are we doing? So that network is just fabulous. I guess my final thoughts are probably be kind to yourself. In fact, definitely be kind to yourself. Give yourself and your team time to think. Give yourself headspace. Really if this podcast is nothing, ask yourself honestly, when did you have a day off just to clear your head? And think about, what are you doing? What are you testing and learning from a people perspective at the moment? So my first thought would be kind to yourself. My second would be really know the business and what it's facing right now, operationally, as well as from a people perspective. Keep an eye on your measures and constantly review your data. What is your data telling you? Because that will help you apply this agility, apply that test and learn if you've got that data. And think about that impact and consequences that we've just talked about when you're trying to create these people solutions. Definitely go for the adapt, don't adopt, pick up the phone to yourself, Nic, and have a chat about some ideas, but very much I don't think one size fits all right now. And look at your actions. How are you really, really leveraging inclusion? How are you really laying those foundations to embrace amazing collaboration, because that is going to drive high performance? What are you doing to create that culture with that clear sense of purpose that really is aligned, that is awesome for your business? Because do you know what? If you get that, our worlds are so much easier from a HR practitioner point of view. But I think also my top tip probably would be celebrate the small wins, because you said earlier it can be quite lonely, and it's often hard, it's often lonely. So be kind to yourself, celebrate the small wins, and maximise your HR network. I think that would be my final piece.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jane, for sharing your thoughts with us. I'm sure people have found that really, really useful, and we look forward to speaking to everybody next time.
Nice. Thanks so much, Nic. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the HRD Talks podcast. Hopefully you found the discussion helpful. If so, please follow us on your podcast provider to be notified of future episodes, and share with friends and colleagues. For more information on the podcast, please visit actons.co.uk/the HRD Talks.